We've bounced back with Laura Koonsberg for the weekend newscast because you've been off.
I have been off, and I'm very happy to be back. I feel we're being gloriously reunited. It's extremely nice to see you, although I saw you on the television quite a few times over the break, which was very exciting.
Yes, that's a sort of trial, but in every sense, especially for the viewer. But Parliament's been off, but there's been a lot happening, and you have been out on Matt Chorley's new programme on 5 Live with some of your analysis. Here it is. We can hear some.
Isn't there an argument about whether or not potatoes are a vegetable?
Well, if you had potatoes, I would have said you could have potatoes and chips and mash.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Is chips not in it?
No.
Well, you can.
That's a dish. That's an entirely separate category.
Well, you know, I mean, I can tell you about avocados and tomatoes. Definitely not their fruit.
There's more.
You see, Matt Chorley, who's got a new programme, just in case anybody...
Well, there isn't anyone who didn't know about that.
Realise.
I think...
I went on yesterday to talk about what we're doing this weekend, but I came on after a quiz about vegetables. And you know me, I felt unable to resist.
I don't want to talk any more about Matt Chorley. I'm fed up with him. You have had an interview with the Prime Minister, which is why you were actually there.
It is. And we have been in Downing Street this morning to do Keir Starmer's first big interview since he became Prime Minister. It's his first sit-down interview, number 10.
Congrats.
Thank you very much. And we went in and we spoke to him for about half an hour in the Cabinet Room, which is something that's really quite unusual. So it's really, really interesting. We spoke to him about lots of different things at great length. The whole interview will be on BBC One tomorrow morning, but I can this afternoon bring you a flavour of the kinds of things that he was going to be saying. And I'm sure Matt Chorley will really want to know that we did manage to get the name of the new kitten. Yes. But I'm not going to tell you that today. You have to wait till tomorrow.
Right, because Larry's going to have a companion and he went...
Two companions.
Two companions, yeah. I mean, it's almost as if newscasters prefer that news to the actual news, but we are going to go ahead with Saturday's newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Paddy in the newscast studio.
And it's Laura in the newscast studio. Hello.
Fresh from Downing Street.
Fresh from Downing Street, yes. We have been speaking to the Prime Minister. We talked about lots of things this morning, which will be on BBC One tomorrow. I think there are a couple of things that just really stood out to me when you walk in. Yes, the messaging from Downing Street has been extremely bleak about their inheritance. They can't fall over themselves but tell us everything has been the Tories' fault and how awful what they've discovered under the bonnet of the country is. However, seeing him and his team in Downing Street, it is obvious from space how incredibly good they feel to be there.
Really?
Yeah.
Because
and
they're
to have the conch, to have the responsibility, to be there, actually now able to act.
They're giving, in the month that you and Parliament have been away, they're giving the exact opposite impression. Oh, we came in to mend your house, the skirting boards, but the whole house is collapsing. There's damp.
Dry
the roof's
rot,
gone.
asbestos.
You won't believe it. We've had to, oh dear, we've had to call the council. They give the complete opposite impression. It's staggering. It's awful. I can't believe it. They've run out of apocalypse now.
And I think they do genuinely believe some of that. Well, I think this will actually, somebody inside government put it this way to me, and I've written about it for the website today, actually. They said, yes, it helps because this is true. We have found things are worse than we thought and things we genuinely believe are terribly awful. Secondly, it's a good political thing because it's what many people in the country think. They believe they won because people thought the country was in a mess, right? So they've hired a new team to get in to sort it out. Clearly, it is also expectation management because particularly in the budget, but also across the piece, they are going to make decisions that they know might not be popular. And it also, from a political point of view, and we kind of, well, Henry and you and me talked about this a lot before the summer, and we kind of predicted it. They are trying to put the Tories' name on all the things that are nasty in the country. You know, the big bin of rubbish, they put the Tories' name on it, is their plan. But how long can that strategy last? Because it's not that attractive, is it, to keep blaming someone else?
Well, I interrupted your main point, which is having met the Prime Minister in the Cabinet Room, you're getting energy, you're getting good vibrations. And I think that's something which we've not heard from a journalist who's been close to the power.
I think you can just see that they are very pleased and excited to be there. That doesn't mean they think it's going to be easy. It doesn't mean they think, oh, wonderful, this is going to be a walk in the park and how great, we're going to take credit for lots of things and we're going to be terribly popular. I just mean from a sort of human point of view, they're like, wow, we're here. We worked hard for this. I feel, I think we've said this before, actually, with Keir Starmer, you've seen over the years, it's like every new job he's got, he's grown a bit more in confidence. It's almost like he sort of grows another inch. And I think now you can see somebody who looks, it might not last for very long, but my impression of him today was somebody who appears to be very comfortable in his skin, and people who know him well and know who Rachel Reeves has said, someone said to me the other day, they've both fallen very naturally into doing the jobs. You know, just in terms of the function, what you have to do all day, how you run things, suddenly having civil servants filling your diary, having meetings that really count, rather than in opposition, when you can stand and shout and hope that somebody might pay attention to some of what you say, but you've got no guarantee, and you've got no guarantee you can change very much.
So shall we listen to your Keir scoop?
Yes. So the thing that was very striking in all this discussion of the terrible inheritance, which has been very focused on the economy, what we're going to get this week in other doom-laden news is a very serious report from a very eminent doctor, Lord Darzai. Not the first time he's done a review for a government, it's worth saying. But he has done a quick look at just how bad things are in the NHS. And I'll take you through the findings in just a sec. But this is how Keir Starmer described what the report had found. And the fact he claims what the former government did to the NHS was, to use his word, unforgivable.
Everybody watching this who has used the NHS or relatives have know that it's broken. They know that it's broken. That is unforgivable, the state of our NHS. The last government broke the NHS. Our job now, through Lord Darzai, is properly understand how that came about and bring about the reforms, starting with the first steps, the 40,000 extra appointments. But we've got to do the hard yards of reform as well. And as I say, I think it's only a Labour government that can do the reform that our NHS needs, and we'll start on that journey.
Just to give you a taste of what the Darzai report is expected to find on Thursday, the bits that have been shared with us so far focus on how bad things have got in terms of children's health. The report has found that there were more than 100,000 infants who had to wait more than 6 hours in accident and emergency in England last year. There are 800,000 children and young people on NHS waiting lists for hospital treatment. 175,000 of them have waited more than 6 months. And there are 35,000 children on waiting lists in England who've had to wait more than a year for treatment. And there are 500,000 children, according to Lord Darzai, who've been on waiting lists for mental health treatment. So if you look just at what's been happening with kids, whether it's because of COVID, whether it's because of, they also identify the Lansley reforms, the health secretary some time ago now, but who kind of unpicked how the NHS works, and that those reforms are absolutely slammed by Lord Darzai. Whatever the reasons are, these are the really pretty grim headlines that Lord Darzai is putting forward this week about the impact of problems of the NHS on children's care particularly.
So we will have on Radio 4 tomorrow the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting. Mm-hmm. And do you think that the incoming Labour government needed an independent reviewer, because their message he's already told us it's broken.
Yeah.
Wes Streeting's already said that day one.
Yeah.
So they needed someone who was actually a medical person to come in and say, here are some things I have found. I'm not Wes Streeting. I
think that's right. I think they wanted, maybe they didn't need it. I think they wanted to have a baseline, right? This is the view. This is the kind of audit, right? So in the same way that Rachel Reeves got the Treasury to do the audit in 5 weeks, however quickly they did it, to do that audit that came up with the £22 billion economic black hole, they call it. And the 22 billion is in some ways a bit of a contested figure. And we talked to Keir Starmer about that tomorrow, so wait for that one. But I think it's quite important how they came up with that figure. But it's like a baseline. Here are the things that an eminent independent person has found that are wrong. This is his diagnosis. You see what they do there of the state of the NHS. And it is probably quite useful for them politically to have a baseline. It's probably also quite useful for NHS England and the NHS to have a kind of, here are the problems, because there's that old adage, right? If you don't know what the problem is, you can't fix it. But it does also allow them again to shout about how grisly what they call the inheritance has been for the former government.
And also, there's an overlap here, which is that Rishi Sunak, as Prime Minister, confessed that he had not met one of his targets, which was to reduce NHS waiting lists.
Yep.
So he agreed we've not achieved the progress we wanted in cutting waiting lists. So there's two prime ministers agreeing that the waiting list problem is too big for the country.
Yep.
Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. And then, of course, the wiggle room there is that Rishi Sunak pinned some of the blame on striking medical staff, including doctors. In comes old Keir saying, we're sorting that out.
Yes.
So that's part of the way we're going to crack the nut.
They hope.
They hope.
They hope.
Contested.
But there's an interesting thing in all of this, right, that I've been thinking about a lot in the last few days, is when does a new government become responsible? So President Truman, American president in the 50s, had on his desk a little sign that said the buck stops here. Up until now, Keir Starmer's been saying if he had a sign on his desk, and I didn't ask him if he had a sign on his desk, maybe I should have done, his desk, the sign on his desk might say, oh, it wasn't me. But at what point does it start becoming their responsibility? Now, it's, of course, if somebody's been in charge for 14 and a half years and then somebody comes in and they haven't even been in charge yet for 100 days, of course it's legitimate to point to your predecessors. Of course it is. But at what point does it start to shift? So, you know, Labour strategists at the moment sort of think, well, we're chiming with the public because people believe that the country's in a bad state and that they think that the Tories mucked it up. They're starting to hear, I'm told, back from their focus groups that this fabled 22 billion figure is starting to cut through. But at what point, if you are then a shivering pensioner in January and we have a really bad cold snap and you think, I can't turn my thermostat up because I've lost my winter fuel allowance, do you think to yourself, oh, that old Liz Truss, that old Boris Johnson, that old Rishi Sunak? Or do you think, I can't believe that Keir Starmer took winter fuel allowance away from me as a Labour Prime Minister? This team are so adamant. One of them said, I don't care if people feel sick of the message about the inheritance. You know, it's that old adage, actually, you have to make people feel sick when they hear something to be sure that it's cut through.
Well, I have an answer for you. At what point will it become a changed sign on the desk? How about I start with this week? Two events. One, a vote in Parliament at which there will be a rebellion and at which Rosie Duffield MP was heard on Radio 4 this morning.
Yes.
And two, the release of prisoners. Longer prison term. Punishment is popular with the British public.
Very much so.
Letting cons out is unpopular with the British public. Now, I know it's going to be allied to it's all their fault. But actually, it's your decision. It's your decision as the government to do this. And they will have a revolt. You might know better than me how big it will be. 40 MPs? Who knows?
Who knows?
They'll have a revolt, and that will be feet on the flame. That's what it's like to be in power. And I think I could go so far as to say the sign will wobble this week.
Well, maybe it will. And I wonder also if we will start hearing just a slight shift away from the sort of doom and gloom.
Oh.
So a whisper reached me that somebody who's in the sort of Labour supporting business world was hopeful that actually there might be a bit of a shift away, because what is one of the other things that the government's trying to do very, very hard is attract international investment. Say, roll up, come in and invest here. Now, if the message that's coming out at 11 on the amplifier, if it was Spinal Tap, saying everything's awful, the country's in a terrible mess, is that the message that you want to be putting around the world? Even if it might be the message you very deliberately want to give to your domestic audience.
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of different things going on. But you're right, prisons, that's massive. Winter fuel allowance is massive. Both of those decisions, they say, have come about because of what happened before. But they are their decisions. You know, they're cock-a-hoop about being in government, but to govern is to choose. You know, that and every single number 10 administration I've covered, and goodness me, I'm quite old now, there's a lot of them, they have all in time been stunned by how much comes onto their desk, how much they get the fierce heat of blame for things that actually have got absolutely nothing to do with them. Because if you're in government and if you're in number 10, you are it, whether you like it or not.
Will they suspend MPs from the party who vote against withdrawing universal winter fuel payments?
I don't know the answer to that. I think they'll have to make a decision. Newscasters, being a clever bunch, will remember that when some MPs, left-wingers like John McDonnell, voted against Labour's King's Speech, they were suspended. But voting against the King's speech, because that's the sort of big programme of government, is a bit different to rebelling in the kind of debate that the Tories are forcing in the Commons this week. Now, that might sound a bit technical, but I think also Downing Street will want to take a careful line here, because if they start kicking people out or suspending them every time they're voted against, that might provide quite quickly an awful lot of grumpiness in their very, very enormous new parliamentary party. And also, I've got to say, you cannot believe just how many of them there are. I went to Prime Minister's Questions this week to go and get a flavour of what the new House of Commons looks like. And there are so many Labour MPs, like they're sitting round on the other side because there's not space enough for them on the government benches. I mean, it is a transformed place. And, you know, you've got Nigel Farage is like squashed in between the DUP and his other Reform colleagues. You've then got people who had, you know, Jeremy Hunt, who for years we've known as somebody who was responsible for great matters of state. Now he's sitting looking a bit cross on the opposition benches. And the people who are looking really knackered because they're the cabinet ministers are all the people who not so long ago were looking sort of, you know, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I mean, it is such a transformation, a physical way of the kind of political landscape. But on those two things that you mentioned, prisons and winter fuel allowance, those are both very big problems for this government.
Do you think that they've got more heat than they expected? For 1.4 billion in savings, pre-announced, initially there was going to be no vote. Is this a sign that they know what they're doing politically? Because I heard Ed Balls on his podcast imply this wasn't exactly how you'd plan it to be for the sake of this one policy when Parliament wasn't sitting, to get all this heat. It's been weeks and weeks of it. While you've been away, it's been all I've been talking about. I don't know. I think so there's two theories that I've heard. One is actually that, yeah, they didn't realise it was going to be quite this bad because suddenly they find themselves with people who had been supporting them very, very strongly, including lots of sort of charities and campaigners who'd be saying, yes, hurrah, we're going to have a new government, who then just a few weeks later are like, oh no, we didn't know you were going to do this. So I think there has been a bit of kind of being, they do seem in a sense to have been a bit spooked about it. There's another argument, though, that I've also heard is that actually it does no harm to have a big row that displays how tough they're willing to be in order to get their main message across. Now, that would be cynical, but hey, that's politics. But sometimes these kinds of ploys can be too clever by half. You know, you go back to the shivering pensioner with the thermostat. How are voters going to feel about this in a few months? But already in Downing Street, the question is not how people are going to feel about it in a few months, it's how they're going to feel about it in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, when the moment comes to vote again. But I have to say also, old sceptic as I am, I've heard plenty of incoming administrations say, oh, well, it's not about the day-to-day. We have to keep the eyes on the prize. It's all about the long-term difficult decisions. I'm willing to do things that are difficult for my eventual goal. But sometimes those day-to-day pressures actually become too much and they are forced into doing things that they had no intention of doing. And that's already a challenge. You know, someone else in government was saying that seeing with the riots and the big row about winter fuel, it's already made them wonder, oh, we've got this clever plan for doing mission-related government. We're already thinking, how are we going to do that? As well as these 400 other million things that are flying into Downing Street every single day. You know, Keir Starmer's going to the White House next week. How do you just, you know, casually fit that in when you're in the run-up to the budget and the run-up to the party conference season, and you've got a big vote on winter fuel, and you're dealing with Grenfell, and you're dealing with all these other million things? And that's the reality of what it's like in Number 10, right? Yeah. I mean, just a quick word about the Tories.
Yes.
We've got you back here. Robert Genrich, who I'm told is the front runner, has done a walkie-talkie social media video, walking and talking at the same time.
Oh, gosh, can he walk and talk at the same time?
Saying
that's amazing.
That you can see what Keir Starmer's up to. He's taking from pensioners and giving it to train drivers because it's his mates writing big cheques each way, the unions, and of course we know newscasters will say business is always donating to the Tories, so we understand there's been that fault line for a long time.
Not so much these days.
Well, they've been giving, but do you think that's going to be the red meat for the Tories? It's like you've well done with the pensioners who we gave the triple lock to. You're giving it to train drivers.
Well, it's a neat political framing to use an awful bit of jargon, and it's what Rishi Sunak did at Prime Minister's Questions this week. He said, how did you decide to give money to train drivers and take it off pensioners? So it's a neat and effective bit of communication. And I think that we've seen, the Tories are not going to be able to push this government around because they are so humbled and they are so small. That does not, however, stop them at all from playing clever opposition politics and thinking of neat little grits in the Labour oyster where they can get a story up. They're the ones who've pushed this debate this week. That's a pretty topsy-turvy thing. You've got a Tory opposition complaining about a Labour government taking money from some vulnerable people in society, right? I mean, talk about a switcheroo. But it was interesting, the Tories have even been using winter fuel as some of their fundraising and membership emails. So obviously journalists end up seeing these as well. But the Tories have been pushing that out, saying, we're going to have this debate. We're going to stop them doing this. So it's a very deliberate thing that's coming from the Conservatives as a party, not just from leadership contenders like Robert Genrich.
Can I say that newscasters often say, can we say things that are true without saying one party says this, one party says that? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to try something out and you'll tell me if I'm wrong. Pensioners got richer under the Conservatives.
Well,
because of the triple lock and because of measures introduced by George Osborne and David Cameron, there was a wealthier pensioner at the end of 14 years than there was at the beginning of 14.
So I think it depends how you count it, as these things always do. However, it is true that pensioners as a group are not as a group in the kind of position that they were in the 1990s and the 2000s. So when David Cameron and George Osborne came of political age, pensioners were much more vulnerable financially. And that's why when Gordon Brown, for example, in what a lot of people would say is an early political mistake, gave pensioners a really miserly increase, that was sort of seen as a big kind of political disaster. And that's why, David Cameron and George Osborne made huge play of protecting pensioners' incomes. Also, pensioners go to vote and they very often vote Conservative. But they made great play of protecting pensioners' income because at that point, pensioners were very often seen as one of the poorest groups in society, if not the poorest group in society. That is no longer the case. So can we say that's absolutely true in all senses, that pensioners are better off now than they were in 2014? No, we wouldn't say that in every case, but we can say that their sort of financial status as a group has moved up the rankings.
Since you've been away, we've been running Adam's feature of the Newscast of Thousands, where newscasters help us to reach the number 1,000 by submitting numbers from their lives or the news. Hello, Newscast team. I'm loving your chats. I've been listening for a long time now. Well, that's because the chats are very long, Ruth. I have a personal cast.
It could only be one episode.
Probably as a girl when she started. I've got a personal cast of thousands number if you want another 50. This week, I've been working in hospital pathology for 50 years. I'm sort of retired, but supporting various tasks part-time. Ruth, we say congratulations and thanks. Tomorrow, I'm taking a home-baked courgette cake to my lovely colleagues. Keep up the chats. Now, 50 takes us from 278.9 plus 50 to 328.9.
What on earth are you talking about?
So it's basically started with 6 Tory leadership candidates, added to the 6, the weight of the Stonehenge stones, and it's been adding. You've probably been listening to it, but like me, you haven't got a good maths brain. Take it from me, it's a very successful feature.
I'll take it from you.
Join us tomorrow when we'll have more from the Prime Minister, more from Wes Streeting.
More from Kate Winslet. Yeah, so tomorrow we've got Kate Winslet, Keir Starmer and Tom Tugendhat, who is the first in a series of interviews with the Tory leadership candidates. You've got Wes Streeting. Who else is on Broadcasting House?
We have got a reformed prisoner, to the point about releasing prisoners. We're also going to talk about where are the British apples in the supermarkets.
So we end as we began, fruit and veg.
Good memory. It was a long time ago, that.
Oh, dear. Well, you'll be on Radio 4 at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. I'll be on BBC 1 tomorrow at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. And then we'll be reunited for our second weekend newscast of the new political season. Goodbye till then.
Goodbye.
Newscast from the BBC.